Chapter 27, The Missing Years. In my life, truth, justice, and liberty were absent. The druggings inflicted on me during my incarceration in High Power were compliments to the district attorney's acquisition of a court order to have me placed in the medical unit. This tactic was an attempt to monitor my visits and telephone calls, and therefore they hoped to obtain self-incriminating statements. Perhaps the district attorney thought I was able to use the phone and entertain visitors while comatose. This was the type of irrational thinking and duplicity in concert. This is not a conspiracy theory, phobic anxiety, nor my imagination that America has not allowed justice to embrace the likes of me. I was expected to acquiesce, to accept a one-sided version of justice. I wasn't able to perceive then what I know now, that anything less than justice is an absolute injustice. Still, the pathetic reality was that although I had no concept of justice, I knew the vulgar variation of injustice intimately. This literary platform allows me to voice a legitimate grievance that most Americans cannot understand, even begin to approach. My stint in High Power from 1979 to 1981 was an amnesiac episode that flew by with the speed of light. I sleepwalked numbly through the majority of the ordeal. I can't recall no specific details about the trial proceedings, nor do I remember engaging in strategic dialogues with any of my several briefly glimpsed attorneys, 2 different public defenders, and 2 different private lawyers. Lynn hired my first private attorneys, Harry Weiss, who handled the preliminary phase and then vanished. After that, my mother and stepfather tried to hire 2 black attorneys, Carl Jones and Charles Lloyd, who both declined on the basis that the case was too hot. Then my family hired an attorney whose name deserves no mention. This attorney would later deliver testimony during a federal deposition that assisted the state attorney general against me. The list of parasites anxious to violate my life were mostly imprisoned snitches out to liberate themselves from the consequences of their crimes by sacrificing me to the court of law. Virtually all of the people who testified against me struck deals for lesser charges or immunity. Samuel Coleman was physically beaten by the police so that he would implicate me in crimes that I did not commit, literally selling their souls. None of these career criminals had any compunction about ruining my life to save their own scrawny necks. In the midst of this madness, Michelle came to visit me along with Wayne, but he was arrested for possessing a loaded weapon in the visiting room. As expected, the investigative detectives turned the incident into a conspiracy depicting my having Wayne attempt to break me out of jail all by himself. To compound matters, I was accused of another escape plot, prefabricated by George Oglesby, who many years later was revealed to be a jailhouse snitch working in tandem with the sheriffs and district attorney. This new fantasy plan involved me and other Crips, of course, high-powered weaponry, and of all things, dynamite. The mention of dynamite and black folks in the same breath should have automatically been dismissed as highly and unlikely. How many blacks in America have access to dynamite, and what company would ever sell explosives to a black man or woman without immediately notifying the cops? It was a ridiculous as well as an untrue accusation. But Oglesby's lies were believed by the jury. While in High Power, I was unable to exercise to relieve all the pent-up tension, to get the blood circulating throughout my body and brain. The problem was that I was incapable of exercising, and most people around who knew me expressed concern. Doc Holliday, alleged leader of the Black Gorilla family, was housed in the cell next to mine. Often he would tell me about his son, also a Crip. There were occasions when Doc and I initiated a push-up routine 5 to 6 times a week, but I couldn't maintain it because I was always too tired, drowsy, or asleep. There were times when Doc would holler over and say, "Took, how come you don't work out anymore? Are those people drugging you?" I'm sure I mumbled something incoherent. When I was on other roles, other individuals I knew, such as McFarlane and Dale, were puzzled by my condition and assumed I was still whacked out on PCP. When I spoke, no one could decipher my words, not even me. Throughout the 2 years of being disoriented, I completely forgot that Raymond Washington had been murdered in August of 1979, 5 months after my incarceration. I believe it was Criplet Jackie who visited me and broke the unbelievable news. Her version of what had taken place was sketchy, and I can't remember too much about what we talked about. As with Buddha, I couldn't picture Raymond dead. How could that have possibly happened? Raymond's death remains a mystery, but when the Crips became a media magnet, it seemed like everybody was Raymond's closest homeboy, his comrade, his loved one, his buddy, and co-founder of the Crips. Preposterous. How many of those same individuals were turning over every rock in society to locate his assassin? How many are in pursuit today, and how many truly care? It reminds me of young Adi's funeral, where individuals were tossing all kinds of memorabilia into his casket. Had he been alive, he would have been hard-pressed to borrow change for a telephone call from most of them. Raymond and I were brought together for a purpose beyond our unlimited understanding, and somewhat along the way we veered off the righteous course. It was a youthful mistake that chased us into adulthood, where we left a legacy of pain and tears among grieving black mothers and other loved ones. We had no legitimate dreams nor attainable visions, only a cruel future, one capable of poisoning our souls. I never knew Raymond's ambitions, but in our small world, ambitions were rare and mostly fantasy. Raymond was a black man with potential, overlooked by the old guard black leadership, who could have used his street savvy, organizational dexterity, and his popularity. He and I co-founded the Crips, a legacy of blood, rage, and death. But if his true worth and potential contribution to the political struggle had been tapped into, his life might have been different. Several months prior to my court trial, I was uprooted and housed alone, incommunicado on G-Row and High Power. There was a place designed for disciplinary actions, and though I had violated no rules, I would reside on G-Row until the jury rendered its decision. I knew the verdict beforehand. I knew the outcome the moment I was abducted from society on these trumped-up charges. Oh yes, I knew. The all-white jury marched single file into the courtroom like a firing squad and blasted me in the cinders. They found me guilty of all charges. On April 15, 1981, I stood before the Torrance Court judge, bound in the usual chains and handcuffs, as the verdict of the penalty phase was read aloud with unprecedented malice. 4 death sentences, as if executing me once wasn't enough. Once again, I was dealt a dead man's hand in life and was shuttered back to the county jail, awaiting transfer to San Quentin. I sat on a bunk in the last cell on the tier by myself, punch drunk from psychotropic drugs that were supposed to have murdered my mind but failed. Though it has been said I received numerous visits, only a handful come to mind. Besides my mother appearing to offer stability in that chaotic setting, others came mostly bearing tidings of deceit or gloom. Once when Michelle came to visit, she told me that she ran into Jamil in the visiting room, claiming to be waiting to visit me. It was news to me. During my entire captivity, not once did he ever visit. Michelle went on to say that Jamil had asked, "Why did you pick Tookie over me when I met you first? You turned me down." He answered his own question. I wasn't shocked. I recalled Jamel asking his one woman years before, who looks the best, Tookie or me. All she did was laugh nervously and refuse to answer. My homeboy Jackie stood there shaking his head in disbelief. After Michelle's revelation, I shrugged it off and said, "Well, I guess Godfather and others' opinion about him were right." That's when she lowered the boom. By the way, baby, I found someone else because you're not out here for me." She was right. I wasn't out there in society for her. There was a pang of regret for losing her, but I sucked it in and blew it out, knowing I had to move on. Though I never fashioned myself as a Lothario, I made myself available to other females to soften the impact of a Dear John drama. During the same time I was hooked up with Michelle, I was fornicating with Monica and other black beauties. But it was a surprise when Monica and Jackie hooked up, although it pissed me off at first. At least, he had the decency to break the news to me face to face, although through most of my life I was a willing sinner of the highest magnitude. In my voice of God's ear, I prayed earnestly for the strength to survive my social drug use and involuntary druggings by law enforcement. I vowed never again to get intoxicated. My decision to repudiate drugs was the beginning of my redemption that would bear fruit for children nearly a decade later.